Before I begin, I would like to express my gratitude to Leandro Madrazo for confiding in me for thinking dwelling. And I would also like to thank Adrià and Angel for all of their help. Many thanks to all of them. Now, Frida and Jose, right? A little birdie told me that some of you are flat hunting. Yeah? If this is so, then let me be of some help. I have just the flat you are looking for. With an admirable orientation, well-lit rooms, cross-ventilation, and no inner patios. What more can one ask for? The flat I have to offer you has 3 bedrooms, with no space lost to corridors, and a generous balcony. Wouldn't you like to live here? Frida? Yeah? Yeah, Jose. Yeah, well. Now, let me show you what your building looks like. And here you have it. A housing estate in Nancy, France, by the French architect, let's see, Bernard Serfus.
Yeah, I don't know, this is not French.
He's one of my French students. Well, thank you. Well, Bernard Serfus, containing 3,388 dwellings, based on the aforedescribed rationalistic criteria. Flats capable of housing all the students and all the teachers from this school and many, many more. We could live together. Well, this block is 400 meters long, and it's one of the longest blocks of flats ever built in Europe. Would you like to live here, Frida? Yeah. Jose?
I don't know.
Please say no. Would you like to live here?
No.
Thank you. Why not? What defects do you find in it? What don't you like about it? Its monotony, perhaps? Do you think it's unattractive? Well, perhaps it is depressing to you. No doubt, it is a very large volume, but its presence does not extend positive environmental values. It lacks in monumentality. It is not easy to establish bonds of affection with the building. There is no yearning to live here. However, to be fair, the dwellings that compose it are altogether acceptable. As you know, as you should know, at least my third-year students, as you know, the block of flats first came into being in Germany in the 1920s, when the economic situation was in dire straits and an urgent solution for the serious housing problem affecting a large part of the population was required. For which, Daniela, where are you? Daniela? Here. For which the architects of the Neue Sachlichkeit, the new objectivity, proposed the concept of existence minimum. Existence minimum. The minimum subsistence dwelling. In this case, it was 30 square meters. 30 square meters. Well, it was an economical proposal which fulfilled the necessary hygienic criteria of the day, and thus ensuring dignity for its dwellers. Dignity. This was the key word. This economic and efficient solution was defended by the architects of the modern movement. And following these examples, the housing block spread with great success throughout Europe during the 50s and the 60s. Some with better luck, others with worse. Your flat, Frida, that is the one I am about to sell you, is just an example of these blocks of flats. And you must remember that this housing block concept was the solution to the precarious housing problem that many people were suffering. And I have a shocking image now. Now look, this is how people lived in Calle Riera Blanca, in shanty towns in the 50s, in the heart of Barcelona. For example, the very same French precast concrete panel company we saw in Nancy built blocks of flats in Belvice and L'Hospitalet, along the lines described before. However, as from the 1950s, young architects began expressing their discrepancy regarding the use made of the block of flats. And here is one of the examples we normally study in class. Allison and Peter Smithson in Golden Lane, London, proposed interconnections between blocks of flats to encourage relationships between its residents. Here, the corridors widen into streets where neighbors meet and children can play. Further criticism of the block of flats. The architect Moshe Safdie cast doubt on its regular geometry, and he proposed the use of more complex associations. In this case, the prefabricated housing units are raised by a crane and attached to the structure. And it was in this context that the young Catalan architect Ricardo Bofill led a group called Taller de Arquitectura, or the Architecture Workshop, which proposed bold solutions in order to overcome the inherent banality of the block of flats. Taller was a multidisciplinary office where architects like Anna Bofill-Levy, Ricardo's sister, Peter Hodgkinson, and Manuel Núñez Janowski worked side by side with the poet José Agustín Goytisolo and the manager Salvador Clotas. And it was Anna Bofill-Levy, José Agustín Goytisolo, the poet, and Manuel Núñez Janowski, the ones who devoted most of their time to research new methods to nurture the taller with new ideas, under the firm conviction that a new and better architecture was possible. Now let's briefly review 3 projects previous to Walden. In the Barri Gaudí housing development in Reus, using straightforward geometry based on a square plan, but rotated 45 degrees and trim, volumetric variety, and an interesting series of terraces are generated. In Kafka's Castle, in Sant Pere de Ribes, near Sitges, the housing modules are arranged in a helical form that reminds one of Safdie. Taller, and this was Nona.
Flexibility.
Just 1 minute. Don't be so eager to answer the question, not yet. Now, Taller defended a utopian metropolis, what they call the city in space. Right? The city in space. Till then, the cities had grown by means of high buildings, garden cities, or blocks of flats. Instead, the city in space would be based on spatial grids that included all the basic elements of urbanism, intermingled all urban activities, and at the same time allowed maximum flexibility so that when society changed, the city could also transform itself. An attempt to apply these proposals in Madrid eventually failed, and the project did not happen over there. It would be in Sant Just Desvern, just outside Barcelona, where Taller got its opportunity to implement the principles of their city in space, in a plot occupied by an old factory. Several buildings were planned, but finally only 2 were built. One was the Taller's future studio, and the second, the residential building that we are going to talk about today, Walden 7. Just look at its unique appearance. and its prominent scale, and how it takes on a monumental character, marking with its presence the surrounding suburban environment. As we approach Walden 7, we discover its unique geometry. It is not exactly a block of flats, no, but its sale price was adjusted to that of a block of flats. Now, what strategies have been put to use here to escape the volumetric regularity of the block of flats? Now, would you describe its form as whimsical or capricious? It was at this time that Anna Levy was writing her doctoral thesis, Contribution to the Study of Geometric Generation of Architectural and Urban Forms. Using mathematics, I know you love mathematics, particularly Fabel and Mate. Well, using mathematics, the thesis sets forth from a single cell to study the systems of association producing complex textures. For example, her thesis proposes various types of L-shaped dwellings with their three-dimensional clusters, resulting in buildings, groups of buildings, even neighborhoods. In other words, cities in space. And circulations between the different pieces are contemplated. Remember the Barri Gaudí in Reus. Now here, the linear development of a core and the generation of a street can be seen. But now, pay close attention to the next drawing we are about to see. Notice how while Anna Levy was writing her doctoral thesis and Walden was being designed, she applies this same geometry you see here to another project she had at hand. Now look. The work in question is a sklat, outburst. But it's not a building. No. It is a piece of music written for 9 instruments. For Anna Levy not only has a solid education in mathematics, but also one in music. In fact, her musical vocation is previous to her passion for architecture and has been nurtured with lessons given by composers such as Yannis Xenakis. She usually organizes her musical work graphically. That is to say, we see how her doctoral thesis can architecture, urbanism, and also music. And how is that possible? Geometry, I know you love geometry. Yes, descriptive geometry, one of your favorite subjects. But geometry is the backbone of it all and is used with a parallel logic in organizing both forms, that of the Walden 7 building on the left here and the musical piece as sklat on the right. The dissertation explores the possibilities of applying basic movements. And here you have them, from top to bottom: translational motion, horizontal symmetry, vertical symmetry, and double symmetry. Now, going back to the musical piece as sklat, and before we listen to a tiny fragment from it, I propose that we try to understand how this musical piece is graphically organized. And don't panic, because I'm going to help you. Just follow me. Now, let's look only at what is framed in red here, which is the part the piano plays. Remember, the piece has 9 instruments, but now we are going to focus on the piano, the part the piano plays. Now, the horizontal axis represents time. And as we move to the right, so time lapses. Whereas the vertical axis indicates the register, its sonority range, the pitch of each note. And I know some of you don't understand this concept. And I have two examples. Let's hope we can listen to them. Now, at the top, we have the higher or sharper notes, while below, we have the lower or bass notes. In other words, now imagine this vertical axis is like a keyboard placed vertically. At the top we have the sharper or higher keys, and below we have the bass or lower keys. Let's try to decipher the meaning of this rectangle. Now, we begin with the first of the two rectangles. Now imagine both hands playing the piano simultaneously at both ends of the keyboard. So the lowest and the highest notes are played at the same time. Moving forward, in time, the position of the two rectangles come closer together, as do the hands of the pianist. Then we come to the next rectangle, which is at the center of the register, and the pianist's hands meet. Now, look at the width of this rectangle. It is greater than the previous two, which means that the duration in this position must be longer. In fact, twice as long as the two before it. Next, we move to the following section. We move away from the central area. And finally, we return to the extreme registers. Therefore, the drawing indicates the areas of sonority. But note that I know Irena. I know Irena is an excellent pianist. Now, notice that we still don't know the specific notes, the keys that will be played inside the rectangles. We know the area, but not the keys we are going to play. Now, to decide the microscale, the internal texture of each area, we will rely on the laws of nature. What does it mean? In the same way that fascinating sounds, such as those of ocean waves, can be described by random distributions, yes, in a sclat, the notes of each field are determined by using formulations of calculus probability. Are you frightened now? Calculus probability to compose music. Well, once Anna Bofill-Levy has defined the musical piece by designing, laying down the scheme, she then writes the score, and the players or musicians interpret it by way of this document. I think we are ready now. I propose we listen to a small fragment from a sclat, just 40 seconds, before we go on talking about Walden 7. I know the majority of you are not used to listening to contemporary music, right? I hope this is a good opportunity for you to begin. Remember, we have the composer here, so later on you can ask her questions, right? Let's listen to just 40 seconds in complete silence. 40 seconds, the musical piece A Sclat. Pages from Anna Bofill-Levy's doctoral thesis includes this volume you see here, generated by a cubic cell with 4 patios containing 1 fifth central courtyard. And this is the scheme followed for Walden 7. Now, here you see the complex fragmented volume. Cubes are associated following the basic laws of translation and symmetries. As a result, the building acquires concave and convex shapes, while its facade opens out, producing windows of, as they say, urban dimensions, windows of huge dimensions. Now, let's look first at one of its modules. Now, although initially it was considered as a cube, the final decision was to divide the cube horizontally. So we will have a duplex or two different flats in a cube. The basic module for Walden 7 is a square plan. We have a square where each side measures 5.3 meters. A unit to dwell, wash, and cook in. Now, curiously, its area, Danny, is 30 square meters. Remember? Existence minimum. Yes, we have it 1 second, but not exactly the same. However, Taller stresses that society has undergone great changes. And this should lead to a new concept of housing. And thus, during the height of Franco's regime in the late 60s, Walden 7 is built with the aim that housing break with previous conventions. This basic unit is in direct contrast with the usual compartmented flat, with closed rooms, with doors. Notice that here, the main function is to dwell. And this concept can be found everywhere, which is why the kitchen is open and forms part of the room. Even more, Anton? What's he decided to do? Anton? Well, this was for him because I know he's shy. Huh? Listen, the bathroom disintegrates, so the bath is also incorporated into the room. But don't be alarmed if you are shy, like Anton, because the bath can also be closed off. Furthermore, the usual notion of furniture is absent here. The tables and shelves are fixed and subtly act as filters between spaces. This basic module of 30 square meters can be used as a studio apartment inhabited by 1 or 2 people. But we mustn't forget that one of the principles of the city space, Nona, is its flexibility and its growth potential. So, now imagine that we add another 30 square meters to it. What functions do we now require to expand our studio apartment? The same module can provide spaces for sleeping and bathing. Taller stresses that the individual members of the present-day family require privacy, where they can develop their function to dwell. Thus, each bedroom includes space for dwelling, not just for sleeping, space for dwelling. Walden 7 offers 4 basic types of housing, based on 1, 2, 3, or 4 modules. We have the type E1, the studio apartment we saw before, the basic module of 30 square meters. We have A1, the 60 square meter flat, made up by joining 2 adjacent modules. We also have B1, a 90 square meter flat, made up by joining 2 adjacent and 1 superior module. And finally, we have the largest flat, C1, a 120 square meter duplex, made up by joining two lower modules and the two above these. Now, let's take as an example the 6th and 7th floors of the building. The area marked here in white appears enlarged on the right. Notice how the different types of flats interweave between Walden 7. Now we get to the 6th floor by lift, and then we continue down the wide corridor to access, let's take an example here, the flat marked here in blue, a B1 type, which has a module on the 6th floor and 2 on the floor above. Notice the flats in green and yellow here work similarly. However, studio apartment E1 in purple can only be accessed through an outside staircase from the 6th floor. And this configuration allows a flat to be expanded by adding modules to it. One of the characteristic elements of the facades of Walden 7 are the cylindrical bow windows that give it an air of randomness when seen from the outside. But, as we saw in the score of Asclat, here too there are limits to where windows can be placed. Here, the reinforced concrete structure that runs vertically, holding up the modules, distinctly marks strips, vertical strips of blind walls. Look at this photo of the work in construction. We can clearly see that the pillars are complemented by cross bracing, right, at the cantilevered floors. The cantilevered floors. So this structure undoubtedly conditions the position of any openings or windows. The building was initially covered with red ceramic tile, the color representing the urban outskirts of Barcelona. However, a year after its inauguration, they began falling off, an incident that has stuck deeply in everyone's mind and always comes up in conversation whenever Walden is mentioned. But remember, it is not always easy to build upon big ideas. I propose we end our talk by visiting the inside of Walden 7, because the building provides multiple stimulating common areas, because we not only dwell inside or within our homes, but also outside them. Are you ready for the visit? This is one of the blue patios, which is best seen as a surrounding three-dimensional volumetric square. Here, we see the perimeter corridors that give access to the flats. And the careful design of these communal areas show the Taller's commitment to extend the concept to dwell both inside and outside the homes. The connecting walkways often widen to become viewpoints to admire the stunning views overlooking the patios. Now, notice that usually the word patio conjures up a dark hall of no window. But here, these patios are like gigantic protective wombs that open out not only towards the zenith, but also through the urban windows that provide the inside with a generous amount of natural light that is ever-changing, thus contributing to the inner vitality so characteristic of Walden 7. Without doubt, Walden 7 is a utopia built 40 years ago that still invites us to think what it means to dwell. As José Agustín Goytisolo, the poet of the group, remember, wrote, Walden 7 is a free expansion, like a symphonic score open to 1,000 sounds.